How do you feel about public speaking? If you're like most of us, it's something that creates in you anywhere from discomfort to absolute terror. But as leaders, it's something that we have to do every single day. And as a result of that, you need to get better at public speaking. And that's why today I am excited to have Laurie Gilbertson on the show. Laurie is a former New York City sex crimes, organized crime, and homicide prosecutor. She also has been a television legal analyst, an educator, and an entrepreneur. She is the owner of Tribeca Blue Consulting, and she helps professionals communicate with clarity, confidence, and creativity. She and I have a very interesting conversation about how you can get better at public speaking through preparation, through understanding of your audience, and by starting every presentation strong and finishing every presentation strong. And so if you are on the spectrum of anywhere from discomfort to absolute terror, when it comes to public speaking, whether to a small group or a large group, this episode is for you. Enjoy my conversation with Laurie. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Laurie, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
You were a public prosecutor in New York for a decade, and in that role, obviously, you did a ton of public speaking in high-pressure situations. What was the biggest failure that you experienced in terms of public speaking in that environment?
My biggest failure was becoming too enmeshed in the case that I didn't think enough about my audience and who I had to speak about my cases to. And remembering that talking to a jury is very different from talking to other lawyers or judges or people who are really in the knowledge of the legal field. And so I think some of my biggest failures in the beginning were failing to really simplify things, to think about who my audience was, and to think about the fact that I really needed to break down cases and break down legal arguments in a way that someone who wasn't big part of that legal system and hadn't been a big part of that legal system could really understand and relate to.
Very interesting, because let's put ourselves in the shoes of, let's say, a general contractor, and you're pitching a project to an owner, and you know the owner is not a technical expert. As you are coming to a situation as a technical expert, in your case, addressing a jury, what steps did you go through in order to simplify your presentation without being simplistic or condescending?
It takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of preparation, and it takes a lot of thought. And to really think, how are you going to break something down to 12 people of varying experiences in their lives? And how do you find that common thread, that emotional thread, that storytelling thread that a jury can relate to, that you can take 12 very, very different people and unite them in seeing something and persuading them in a way that goes along with the facts of the case. Like I said, a lot of practice and a lot of preparation and thought, a lot of talking to other people, a lot of putting those themes and stories out there to see what resonated, what made sense, what didn't make sense, breaking them down. People have said, if you can explain it to your aunt or you can explain it to a fifth grader, that's a good tool. So really trying to think about what is the most simple way that is interesting, that shows the jury that I trust them with this knowledge. So not being too simplistic, like you said, and that would resonate with them. That takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, it does. And I think this interesting thing here is the dynamic between emotions and facts, or how facts and emotions relate together when you're in a presenting environment. Why is it that emotions are so important when you're looking to persuade people?
We start our lives when we are really little, making sense of our lives through emotion and through stories. As young as 2 years old, when children are starting to get language, they tell themselves stories to make sense of the world around them. And that's something that doesn't go away when we grow up. That kind of emotion has been shown to really impact learning, impact education, and impact persuasion, and that people remember things when you wrap it in a story and when you wrap it in emotion. And that really just goes to a lot of neuroscience that I'm really not qualified to fully get into, but studies showing that that is what connects in our brain. And that's what makes us remember things.
So let's talk about the structuring of a story. As you were getting a case ready and you were, again, going through all the technical details, the minutia, and you're looking to find that thread, you're looking to communicate powerfully and effectively to the jury. How would you structure a story? Did you have a particular format that you used?
The idea of structuring it really, you have to have the knowledge first. So like you said, you have to go through all the details. You have to know your case better than anyone else in the courtroom. Better than anyone, better even you feel than the witnesses you're going to be having on the stand, just better than everyone. You want to know that you are just so intimately acquainted with the facts of the case. And really only then can you start to think about what is the story of this case? What is the theme of this case? And when I started as a district attorney in New York, we were told it's going to take you 10 trials till you start to feel comfortable doing this in the courtroom. And I think that was really true because there's so many nerves that come into that. There's so many kind of scary things about being a new lawyer with all this responsibility in this high pressure situations that a lot of lawyers forget to think about that big overall thing. What is the story? And so the way you start thinking about that is by asking that exact question. What's the story of my case? It's not that on this X date, X time at X place, this person, you took a gun, put it in someone's face and stole their property. That's not a story. Those are facts that you're getting across. What's the story? And you start to think, okay, well, what is the story? Where was this person coming from? What are the feelings involved? What was actually stolen? Did it have some meaning to them? Was there more to this? What happened afterwards? And then just starting to wrap it up so that you can answer as you go into that courtroom, this is what my case is about. And then you can tell the judge or you can tell the jury, this is what my case is about. This is the story of my case. And so it's not so much that you are telling little stories throughout. It's that there is a big overarching theme to each case. And it's a matter of figuring that out.
What are some of the elements of a good story?
Well, emotion, like you talked about. And, storytelling, if you think about it, it's become such a buzzword these days that you tell stories. And especially with the kind of communications that I'm involved with, people want to know, how do I tell a great story? So you really can break it down pretty simply so that it's not intimidating. And you got to remember, we've been telling stories to ourselves, to our families, to our friends, probably every single day since we had language. So if you come home from work and you say to your spouse, your partner, your kids, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what happened today. You're not going to believe what this person did. You're not going to believe this conversation I have. You're telling a story. When you read to your kids at night, you're telling stories. Really understanding that good stories do not have to be this epic presentation that someone who is so experienced gets up on a stage and tells to 1,000 people. It doesn't have to be that. I like to break it down like this and say, this is going to sound very simplistic, but this is truly what I believe it is. There's a beginning, basically. There's a middle, and there's an end. You know why this story is important to you, and you tell your audience why it should be important to them. When you're telling a story, you need to kind of start at the end. You need to know, why am I telling this? Why is this important? And why is anyone going to care? And that's what starts to make a good story. You have to start at that jumping off point. And then you can get to the kind of interesting visual language you want to use, the kind of emotion that you want to bring in and share, the way that your voice can go up, can go down. You can pause and bringing that delivery into it. But you really got to cross that threshold first of, why am I telling this story? Why is it important for me to tell this story?
I was just wondering, as a prosecutor, obviously your goal, as far as I understand, was to convict the person on trial.
Your goal as a prosecutor is to do justice.
Okay.
Take it to trial. Yes. When you are at trial, if you have the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, your goal is to get the conviction that justice demands.
Were you ever in a situation when you were telling these stories where you presented the defendant in a sympathetic light to begin with in order to connect with the jury, and then as you went through the story, you subverted that sympathy by bringing out the perspective of the victim or just the situation? Did you ever work it like that?
That's interesting. Every case was very different and every defendant was different. And there were certainly cases in which I could have sympathy for the defendant, and I knew the jury would have
Sure.
sympathy, or at least empathy in some way. And part of that is addressing that right away with the jury. So I can't think of a particular case right now,
Right.
but there were definitely times where I would address that as a jury, you may feel sorry for this person, or
Right.
you may feel that they were in a position where this was their only choice or something like that. But then to come around to not so much subvert, as you said, but really to say, good word, but really to say that that is not the way to look at this case. And that's not the way the law looks at the case. And that's not the way the law demands that you look at this. The law demands that you look at this through what effect those actions had. And that here we're going to show you the actions, the effect of the actions, the consequences of the actions. And that one thing you often say to juries that I often did was, even if you feel for this defendant, that emotion doesn't play a part in your decision. The same way when you feel for a victim, you are supposed to put that aside. And you're really looking at the law. Did I, as a prosecutor, prove my case to you beyond a reasonable doubt?
That's interesting.
And you got to
because,
put that aside.
Yeah, it's interesting because earlier you're talking about communicating with emotion, and then you're asking them to put aside their emotion.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
How do you deal with that tension there?
You deal with it in a way where you certainly cannot appeal really to a jury's emotion by saying, this was a horrible thing. You have to feel sorry for what this victim went through, and that's why you convict this defendant. You do that, you're going to be overturned for prosecutorial misconduct. You can't do that. So it's a very fine line of walking where you are facts and circumstances, especially in criminal trials and especially in serious felony cases, sexual assaults, homicides. I mean, these all bring up emotion. And it's impossible to totally divorce that from the case. The way you walk that line is you are not appealing to emotion for a verdict. You are not saying find him guilty because you feel badly for this victim. You find this defendant guilty because he did these things. It's a fine line, and it is very interesting in our justice system, the way that all attorneys really have to walk that line, and judges too.
So I suppose that the effective attorneys are the ones who are able to weave in the emotional element without overtly appealing to that element. Am I right there?
I could not have said it better.
Let me just go to this idea of objections. There's no legal case that's ironclad, perhaps. There's always perspectives that you can take. As you were approaching a case and you were studying it and you understood that there were potential weaknesses in your arguments just because of the nature of the case, not because of your own lack of ability or something, would you build those objections into your presentation? Would you expose them? Would you seek to hide them? How would you decide what to do in terms of the weaknesses of your case?
You never hide them, or at least I never hid them. One of the things that I work with people with communicating, and that's something that I learned in court, is this idea of how you handle weaknesses, how you can turn weaknesses into strengths. So I had cases, I would say, where the victims in the cases were not generally people who would engender a lot of great emotion from juries. Say,
Yes.
perhaps your drug dealers or
Yes.
your murderers or your violent felons who were either the victim of a crime or who were my witness because they were cooperating with the prosecution and were giving information. So what you really need to do, both on opening, closing, and in directing those witnesses, is approach it head on. The jury's not going to be afraid of it if you're not afraid of it. Right. So it's right out there. It really even starts before opening. It starts in jury selection. Can you believe someone who has a long record? Just because someone is engaging in crime, does that mean that they are not entitled to the same protections as you are or as I am, to not be robbed, to not be raped, to not be assaulted? So you really start kind of inoculating the jury to really examine that and think about it so that by the time your witness is on the stand, they know who that person is. And it's not a shock and you haven't hidden anything. If you hide something, you have given up your credibility. And as an attorney, and especially as a criminal prosecutor with the power and responsibility that you have, your credibility is the most important thing to have in the courtroom.
So let's talk about that. There's a couple of things I want to ask is, how does being open about the weaknesses of your case help to build trust with the jury?
There's a couple different things in there. One thing is that you are being open and transparent and honest with the jury. That builds trust and credibility. Because if you didn't say anything and you've said this is some fantastic witness who's going to get on the stand and tell you this whole story, and then the witness gets on the stand and they learn all of these things about the background without hearing from you first about it, they're going to feel surprised and let down, and maybe that you hid something, you were trying to get something over them. So that's one thing. Another is kind of like I said, that these weaknesses are not always weaknesses. So for example, if you have a witness who's cooperating with you, the reason generally that these witnesses know so much about the crime that they're testifying about or know so much about the background is because that's the world they're in, because they have that entree and that knowledge because they're in it. And that's why they're a valuable witness. So that's a way of kind of taking that weakness and turning it into a strength and having the jury understand, I am bringing you this witness because of all these things. And I am bringing you this witness to help you understand this case. And so that's another way you're building trust with the jury. You're letting them know exactly why you're doing things and being transparent about why they're hearing from certain people. The idea of a trial, you see it in movies and people see it on television, and there's Law and Order and there's all CSI, there's all these things. And then people get into court as jurors. And I mean, it's a totally different experience. It's not anywhere near as exciting most of the time. There are long stretches where they may not be doing anything and things are going on with the lawyers, but they want to be a part of it. They want to understand it. In jury trials, the judge will tell the jury over and over, you are the most important people in this courtroom. Not me as the judge, not these lawyers, you and the person on trial, you are the most important people in this courtroom. And so you got to treat a jury with respect. And part of that respect and trust is when there are weaknesses in your case, being straight with them about it.
One of the things that interests me about the legal system is that you have a jury in the room, and it's a jury that in most cases is pretty diverse, both in terms of background, experience, maybe even education, et cetera, et cetera. What did you do to read the jury and then to adapt to a diverse group? Did you focus on appealing to one person in the jury? Did you focus on appealing to a group of people? How did you kind of suss out your audience and then adapt yourself to that audience?
It's a difficult skill. There is a lot of psychology involved in that, a lot of communication involved in that. I had a mentor at the district attorney's office who used to say very famously, it doesn't matter to me who's on the jury. Just give me the first 12. I'm good. I can convince anyone. I'm good. I did not subscribe to that. I think it's a lot more difficult. So the way of doing that is you have very short time with people. At least when I was practicing, you have jury questionnaires. In state court, you get some time to voir dire them, to do the jury selection with questioning them yourself. In federal court, the judge is actually asking the questions, and the lawyers are not even often having the opportunity to speak directly with them. So you're looking at a jury questionnaire that gives you a name, an occupation, a general area the person might live, a general age, maybe some family history, whether they've been the victim of a crime, whether they've been in another involvement in a case. So you don't have a whole lot to go on. You really start to do with a jury is you kind of start to read, how do you know who's following me? And how do you know who's not? This is much like an audience in a presentation. So hopefully your jury's with you, but you look at facial expressions. You look at their body language. Are they sitting up straight, facing you, facing your witness, nodding their head? That's pretty much going to tell you they're paying attention. Are they, as one juror I had in a case who made it quite obvious that he was not interested in anything I had to say, turning your back fully on you, which I knew that was not a guy that was going to listen to me anymore. It was over. And I had to take some actions on that. So a courtroom is a courtroom, but it is so many things are exactly like the real world. So the same things that would tell you if you're talking to people at a meeting or you're doing a sales call or something that would tell you if that person's listening and paying attention, same exact thing in the jury box. And then what I would often do in cases, certainly you're making eye contact the best you can with the jury. You're kind of getting a sense, like I said, with the body language, with where they're looking, with the expressions on their faces of what they're paying attention to and how deeply they're paying attention. And then you can start to sense, or at least I would start to sense, who are my allies on this jury? Who are the people who are really with me, who seem to be agreeing with what I'm presenting here, who seem to be following along with the arguments and with the witnesses, who seem to really be getting it. And then those are the people who I really spoke to. When I would be making a closing argument, I was speaking to my allies who were going to go back in the jury room, and they were going to be my proxy, and they were going to use my arguments, and they were going to build on those arguments to maybe convince people who may not have been quite to that point yet, who may have been getting there, but want me to talk it through quite a bit more. And that's who I would focus on. If there was someone who I could tell was just not with me, I did not ignore that person, but that wasn't where I put all my efforts, because I didn't necessarily feel that was what was going to be effective.
Okay. So why do you think people struggle with public speaking?
Well, think about it. There are very few things in life that are more vulnerable than getting up in front of people and talking. It's a very vulnerable position to be in, because I think people are afraid of being judged on how they look, judged on what they say, judged on the content of what they say. Can be a pretty scary thing.
Have you ever run across people who aren't intimidated by public speaking in any way? Or generally speaking, they don't get nervous, they just something they do?
I have. Generally, a lot of the people who really love public speaking and presenting are the people who have put a lot of work into getting good at it, and put a lot of work into the practice of it, in the preparation of it, in the way they want to do it, so that they feel really comfortable. There are a few people, and there were definitely some I worked with as a prosecutor, because we kind of had to be people who like this, who were just amazing. And you just felt like this was how they were born, and they were just super good at it. But I wouldn't say that they never got nervous. I really wouldn't. They most likely didn't show the nerves, but people who get really excited about public speaking are generally also the people who get nervous, because that's that adrenaline going. If you get to a point where you are so calm, so comfortable, and you're not feeling any butterflies, I kind of think that's not a great place to be. I think you need a little bit of that to keep you going. I get nervous before everything I do.
Right.
And I've been doing this a while, and I teach people how to do it, and I still get those nerves.
How do you manage that? How do you manage your nerves?
I prepare so that I'm really, really prepared. That's the lawyer in me. I practice, which I actually really don't like doing, but I force myself to do it so that I hear the words that are in my head coming out of my mouth and make sure they sound good, and that I get comfortable wrapping my mouth around them. Literally, I do that. Before I am about to do something, I stop and I take a couple breaths. I close my eyes and I just take 3 breaths. And I just kind of tell myself, not I'm nervous about this. I say, I am excited to do this. And maybe it sounds a little cheesy, but I get that mindset in my head, like I am excited to share. I'm excited to do this. And I try to turn the attention away from me, because it's not about me, and onto the audience. What am I giving today? How am I helping this one person or this 100 people? What am I going to leave them with? And so I try to kind of turn it away that way so that I'm not thinking about me when I get up there.
Why do you do that part of it? Why do you make it about them as opposed to about you?
Because it should always be about your audience. It should always, always, always be about your audience. Technically and logistically, I do it because it takes my mind off of thinking about, how do I sound? How do I look? Is this going to go well? Are people going to feel good about this? So it tricks me a little bit into taking my mind off myself. But I really also do it because when you turn your attention to the audience, it makes the nerves go away. Even today, you and I got on here and I was a little nervous the way I am before I do anything.
Sure.
And I tried to think to myself, like, what do I get to talk about today that's going to be fun, that's going to hopefully give your audience something when they're listening that they can take away and improve their speaking and feel better and get some confidence about communicating? What's something new I can talk about that I can share? And so I even did that just to try to kind of think about it that way.
Let me ask you about your preparation. What are some good tips or keys in terms of preparation that you can give us, please? Everyone
prepares differently. So it's a really good idea to start thinking about what works for you. Often it takes just a lot of trying a lot of different things. For me in particular, I write everything out. So as an example, for stories, let's say there's a story I want to tell. I will type out the whole story, and then I'll read it, and then I'll edit it, and then I will start saying it. And then I will take my phone out and I'll start saying it into my phone, and I'll see how long it is, and I'll cut it shorter and shorter. I don't know if you know the Mark Twain quote that says, I wanted to send you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I sent you a long one.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know the exact one, but something along those lines. The more you can cut things down through preparation to kind of that gem, that core of meaning in the middle of your story or your presentation, the better it's going to be. You're doing the work for your audience before you're getting to them.
How do you know what to edit?
I know because I can kind of sense what feels right to me because I've been doing it for a while. But one way to do it is to start telling your stories to other people. It can be a friend, it can be a colleague, it can be your child, someone else's child. Just start telling those stories and you will start to feel what feels good to you. I coach people to go on podcasts much like this one. And that is the same advice I give them too, that when you are going on, even in your speaking engagements, your podcasts, your presentations, start telling your stories and you will see the reaction of other people and you will feel what feels good to you. Another way, certainly you can work with a coach who will give you that kind of feedback, but often will give you the same advice. You just have to start doing it. Speaking and communicating well, unfortunately, is not one of those things that you can kind of learn in your head and then just master it. It's a lot of doing. That is how you start to learn. Also, learning from other people. Start watching some TED Talks. Keep listening to podcasts like yours where people can learn from your guests and hear how people communicate things. And you kind of see what makes a good story, what makes a good presentation, what sounds good. Was it the pause that the person used when they were telling the story? Was it that they started the story with a question? Was it that they started the story saying, imagine being here and let me tell you all about it? Everyone's got a different style and no one can really tell you what yours is. It's something you kind of have to discover. And you discover it from doing the preparation, doing the practice, but also from looking at other people. What are great speakers doing that you can see, that you can incorporate and make your own?
I'm honest with myself. I kind of lack charisma in the sense that people aren't eating out of my hand when I get up to speak. And so it's just kind of a painful thing for me. But I know I'm in a place of leadership, so I have to do presentations or I have to do pitches to clients, things like that. How do I get over that hurdle of lacking charisma or just generally being uncomfortable?
It's interesting, that word charisma. It means so many different things to different people. And the first thing I'd suggest is that anyone can be charismatic in their own way. Everyone has something unique to share. And that the important thing is focusing on what is it you want to share in this public facing role that you now have. What are those experiences? What is that expertise? What is that knowledge? What do you want to share with the people that you're going to be speaking with? Turning it around again to that audience. Maybe you're in a fantastic company and you have all these amazing services and you want to get out there and benefit all these people by doing great construction projects. You want to be their resource. And so it's a matter of kind of turning it to that audience, not thinking about, I lack charisma, because there are lots of ways to kind of enhance your delivery of how you are delivering kind of that message, that knowledge to your audience. But before you work on that, it's getting your mindset straight, because kind of that mindset of, I don't have charisma, I'm really bad at this, this is awful. Right? That's going to make it hard to get up there and do it. And so working, first of all, to start to think, what is all this great stuff I have to share? Right. Write it down. Here's my company. Here are great services. Here are the things I want to get across. So that's the first thing, starting with all that great content, which starts to build confidence. Like, oh, you start to think, oh, I am an expert. I know all about construction. I know so much more than all these people know. They need to hear from me. If I don't get out there, they're not going to hear from me. So starting to almost think like, oh, I'm doing a service. I'm doing a service to these people. And I'm doing a service and getting all this word out. So then you start to think, okay, well, here's what I want to get out. And starting really small. You don't necessarily start at your huge presentation in front of 500 people. just starting to kind of have those one-on-one conversations about what you're offering and breaking it down for people and starting to think about how can you share these things in an interesting way? Do you have an interesting story to share? What if there's a story? Say, Eric, you have a story about maybe the first thing you ever worked on. It's a really interesting story. Starting to kind of figure out what that story is and starting to share that so that you feel connected to what you're talking about. So it doesn't feel like a burden to you. And then just starting small, the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it, the better feedback you're going to continue to get. And then you're going to start to feel really comfortable. And it's not going to be in that mindset of, I don't have anything to share, because you're going to see that you have so many valuable things to share.
Earlier on, you were talking about the juror who turned his back on you and as a way of demonstrating that he wasn't interested in what you're saying.
Yeah.
What are some strategies that I can use in a presentation where the audience that I have, I must engage that person who is not engaged? That's part of my responsibility. What are some strategies that I can at least attempt to use in order to bring in someone who isn't engaged in my presentation?
Well, part of that starts when you're creating the presentation. And part of it starts with kind of the respect you want to show your audience by taking the time to prepare it really well, to think about what's going to connect with them. And then part of it is with the engagement that you're going to have with them. So say instead of the things that are going to start to get those people who may not originally be interested to really interact with you are making that presentation interactive. Having some time in there where they can speak with you, where they can answer questions, where you're putting things out in the audience, where you are, for examples, asking for feedback, using interesting graphics, interesting video. If you have someone in that audience who is not engaging with you, one way of kind of dealing with that particular situation in the moment is engaging with the people around that, engaging with the people who are engaged with you. It's going to be a lot harder to get that person, in my example, to turn around and pay attention. It's going to be a lot harder, and you don't necessarily want to call it out, make anyone feel embarrassed. And also, you don't know what's going on with them. What if they're having a really bad day? What if something's going on in their family? Like, you just don't know. Honestly, may have absolutely nothing to do with your presentation. So engaging with the people who are engaged is going to draw that person in, and doing some kind of subtle things in that way so that once the rest of the audience starts doing it, that's hopefully going to bring that person along.
Let me ask you about audience interaction, because this is another thing that you got your presentation, but then you've got to manage the audience as you're going through it. When I think of audience interaction, I think of individuals, small groups, and then the whole room. Is there a particular structure that you use in presentations or that you teach people in terms of how to deal with those three levels of groups, so to speak, the individual, the small group, and the whole room when making a presentation in terms of getting interaction?
I love thinking about it that way. It's a great way to put it. So it depends on the size, right? So if you're speaking to a group of 5, you kind of have to worry a little less about the small groups because you've already got that kind of small.
Let's think about it this way. So let's say I'm the owner of a construction company and I've got the guys from the field in for a safety meeting. And so I've got a group of 35 or 40 superintendents and foremen. We're having a barbecue or something like that. And they're at round tables. And I want to make sure that they get the most out of the presentation. How would I handle that kind of situation?
So one fun way is engaging people, not just in talking, because sometimes people get a little nervous to answer a question or throw something out. So one way you can do it is you're posing a question, but instead of people having to answer that way, they can do things such as standing up, raising a hand. I saw someone do a fabulous presentation where they had the whole audience stand up. So here's something you could do. You get all the foremen, you ask them all to stand up, and then you can start asking questions. Who is comfortable with X? If you're not comfortable with X, sit down. Who is comfortable with Y? If you're not, sit down. And so you're learning a little bit about everyone. Everybody's kind of engaging with each other and with you. It's funny. Some of these questions can be kind of funny. So you're breaking the ice a bit. And then what you can do is at the end, you aim to have maybe 1 or 2 people standing and they get a prize. They get to come up and do something. They get to be your guinea pigs for something or whatever you decide on. But that way you've engaged people with emotion. You've engaged them with humor. You've engaged them with each other and you've engaged them physically. So nobody's felt any pressure and they've all gotten to be part of kind of this great group activity. So that's one way to kind of pull people in that way. You talk about small groups and that's something that I love. You do not have to be the sole voice that people are hearing at your presentation. And honestly, I don't want to be the sole voice that people are hearing. I want them to hear from each other too. And that makes it so valuable. So immediately, one thing I like to do at the beginning of the presentation sometimes, say I'm doing a presentation on introductions. Everybody turn to the person on your right, and I want each to take 30 seconds. I'm going to time you. Introduce yourself in any way you want to introduce yourself. I'll let you know when the 30 seconds is over and it's time to switch. So each person introduces themselves. So that way they're not speaking in front of a group. There's nothing to be nervous about. They're getting to know each other. Then you bring everybody back and you can say, okay, each pair of the group, tell me something you learned about the other person.
Yes.
And then they're sharing. So everyone's getting to know each other. And then they all feel like a part of the community. And so then when you are then presenting, you've already created a connection between you and your audience because you've facilitated it, but you've created a connection between themselves. And it makes it much, much richer.
Excellent. So connecting not only with yourself, with the audience, but the audience with themselves. And that creates sort of a vibe in the room where we're sharing an experience together.
Yes. And that way that you are less likely to have the people who aren't going to be engaged.
Yeah, no, I really like that. That's excellent. Okay, I really appreciate your time here, Laurie. So as I'm thinking again, and we can kind of summarize here, as I'm thinking about putting together a presentation, whether it's for a large group or a small group, give me 3 action items that I should be taking every single time to make sure that I'm doing my very best when making a presentation.
Okay, so you have a very small amount of time. Not to scare you, but neuroscience shows it's 3 to 7 seconds to grab the attention of your audience. You want to start strong. That is one thing that people can do to start strong. You don't want to start with, hi, I'm Laurie. We're going to talk about public speaking today. You want to ask a question, share a statistic about construction projects, a statistic that's interesting, pull them in with something. Use the word imagine. It's a great way to pull people in, but do something different like that to start strong. If you're worried about being introduced to your audience, you have someone introduce you. That way you jump right into it, or you give that really strong creative introduction, and then you can talk about who you are. So that's number one. The second one is a bit about what we talked about with storytelling. Think about your presentation as a story. What is your theme? What are you talking about? What are you trying to get across? And you need to try to boil that down into a sentence or two. Don't make your audience do that work for you. You need to do that work for them. Trust them enough to do that work for them. That's how you're going to get that connection. So think about it. You should be able to say, I'm giving a presentation and it is a presentation about X. Simple as can be. And then the third thing that people can just take away and do that is going to make any kind of presentation shine is much like the introduction. You need to end strong. So you start strong and you end strong. The same techniques that you can use to grab that audience in the beginning, you can use at the end. So a statistic, a question, a story, a great video that ends it. How many presentations has everyone been to? I know I have, where it ends with, that's all I have. Any questions? Right? You've missed that big opportunity to leave your audience with that story, that theme that you've planned your presentation around, because then you've kind of ceded control to whoever in the audience has a question and you don't even know what it's going to be. And you may not know how you're going to answer it. So end strong. Think about what emotion do you want to leave your audience in? Do you want to leave them curious? Do you want to leave them happy? Want to leave them inspired? Want to leave them, maybe with your example of the foreman, you want to leave them like ready to go out and work. How do you want to leave them? You control that. I'm not against Q&A. Q&A is great. You can do it after, or you can do it during. There's always a place for it. But if you just incorporate those two things, starting strong and ending strong, you, I promise, will see such a difference in how you feel delivering those presentations. Because Eric, there's your charisma right there. And you'll also see a difference in the feedback and the engagement you get from your audience. So I really encourage people. Doesn't take long to do that. Just give it a try.
Excellent. Really, really appreciate your time, Laurie. How can people get in touch with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. As a former prosecutor, I was also a former television legal analyst, and I am currently an entrepreneur. So the name of my company is Tribeca Blue Consulting, named for where I used to live near in New York City. And you can reach me on my website. It's tribecablueconsulting.com. There's a form on there. You can contact me directly to continue the conversation. I'm happy to do that with anyone listening. And I'm also on LinkedIn at Laurie Gilbertson. And what I do with my company is much of what we talked about here. I help people communicate better in all sorts of situations, whether you're talking to an audience of 1 or 10 or 100, using a lot of the stuff that we've talked about.
Excellent. Well, we'll put the links in the show notes to your website. And Laurie, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience and your wisdom. Thanks for joining us on Construction Genius today.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Laurie. Hope you got some insights into how to become a better public speaker. Feel free to connect with her on LinkedIn or on her website, tribecablueconsulting.com. All the links are in the show notes. Feel free to share this interview with other people in your network that you think would benefit from it. And of course, please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. It helps the podcast to spread throughout the interwebs. I really appreciate you listening. Look forward to connecting with you sometime on LinkedIn. You can always find me there, or you can go to my website, constructiongenius.com. Have a terrific day.